ليلة المداد يا الله اسقينا بالمداد يا الله.
Who would you rather be killed by, the Italian mafia or the Russian mafia? Nobody had ever thought Jummah would not occur.
That verse now applies to the Tory government.
That's true.
He is
Do
an
you
IT
guys-
guy, and he's got 4 chickens he's bought today.
Yeah. That's the goat, son. I wouldn't galvanize the whole community. I'm going to look for one nut.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I've started recording, so alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum to everyone listening. Assalamu alaikum to Dr. Shadee in particular, our special guest for today. And assalamu alaikum to Maulana Asim and Dr. Sufyan also. This is the second Karima podcast. And it's been a blessing for us, alhamdulillah, over these past few days, although we've had quite a lot of time just to start thinking about things. And then we've managed to reach out to Dr. Shadee. So assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shadee. How are you?
Salam, rahmatullah. Everything doing good, alhamdulillah, and nice to be on your program.
So some of the things we wanted to talk about today was actually we were just discussing before we came on, before we started recording, was actually we're still in lockdown. And how are things over in the States in terms of lockdown?
Well, our lockdown is sort of in flux right now because there's no real evidence to change things. People are still dying. We just had a death in our community again. And Brooklyn, I think, had a triple digits of deaths in one day earlier this week. So it doesn't seem like there's much evidence to it. But at the same time, there's the whole debate of, we're going to kill ourselves by economic doom. Right. So there's that debate going on. And so people are, mixed, confused. All you can do is the governor has the authority to give these statements. And in these chaos situations, I actually personally think that chaos is actually worse than a bad decision. So our perspective would always be like, all right, you have ulul amr, whether you like them or not. Ulul amr being those people are in charge, right?
Yeah.
Whether you like them or not, it doesn't make a difference, but it's better than chaos, right? So that's my take on it. And anyway, what are our opinions going to matter? We're not the decision makers, and we have nothing to support our decisions. So it's going to be up to the decision makers. If it's out of our hands, then there's no point in carrying on about it.
Is New Jersey part of New York, or is it like a separate?
New Jersey New Jersey is a separate state, but because we are so close to New York, so we're literally like hugging New York like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then New York goes up further north, but New Jersey is like hugging New York. The bulk of people who work in New York, they're divided between people who live in New Jersey, in upstate New York, and then who live in southern Connecticut. So those are most of the people who work in the city during the daytime. I think the city in the daytime, the number in Manhattan doubles. The population doubles in the daytime, I think. All right. So most of these people are workers, or employees. So that's where New Jersey can act like a suburb of New York, essentially. We're divided by water, though. There are some waterways. To get into New York, you have to go through the Holland Tunnel or Lincoln Tunnel, or Holland Tunnel in the south, Lincoln Tunnel, or the George Washington Bridge.
Is
so
that
you have to go over water.
Because of the Dutch colonialists or something? Is that why it's called the Holland Tunnel? Is there like some sort of Dutch connection between?
Yeah, that's probably right. I didn't even think about that. But the Dutch are the first people who bought it from the Native Americans for the value of like $24. It was a piece of land that, and New York is amazing because it's so thin. Everyone has to build upwards, right? So you go in there and it's just like towers everywhere, right? And everything goes up. And when you're driving in, it's such an amazing sight. I think it's one of the wonders of the world. It's not technically, the 7 wonders of the world, quote unquote. They need to remove one of them and put the New York skyline. Because when you're driving up, you just look and you see this amount of towers, and they start lighting up around sunset, and you start seeing that. It's one of the most amazing sights. Problem is that you go to New York when you're 6 years old, 7 years old. Every other city's downhill from there, right? and you don't realize. So you go to Chicago, I'm waiting to see the same thing. I don't see it. I go to San Francisco. I'm waiting for the same, intimidating city look. I don't see it. Like London, similar. Like London has its different charm, but it's also sprawl, right? It sprawls out. There's room. There's no room in New York, so you have to build upwards. Okay, and so because also the idea of the cityscape or the skyline, they judge the buildings that can go up by beauty standards. You can't just throw up any building. There have to be standards to be met. So, where are you guys in London?
We're just outside of London. We're in a town called High Wycombe.
High Wycombe.
Yeah.
One of those towns that I remember hearing the name a lot. It's got an interesting ring to it, but I've never been there. I don't think.
High Wycombe Sharif. We've petitioned the council to add Sharif at the end.
Why, you guys have a lot of Muslims in it?
We don't have that many. We've got about, I want to say, 20,000, just a bit more than that.
Muslims,
yeah.
That's crazy. That is a crazy. I mean, London, England is like that, man. SubhanAllah. 20,000.
20,000, yeah. And so, yeah, I was going to say, maybe don't quote me on those figures, but yeah, I think it's about that much.
And you have Huffaz and Madaris and everything?
Not in
Yes,
High Wycombe.
absolutely, yes. In High Wycombe we do, yeah.
Really?
Wow.
Not to that extent. Like, it's not Chicago. So our Chicago is probably Birmingham.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe.
It's just a sport. You know, while we're on New Jersey, the stereotype of the mafia? I've always wanted to ask.
Oh, yeah.
Is that legit?
The house that I grew up in was owned by a mafia architect. He owned the house. He built it for himself. It was so gaudy. They're gaudy, right? Like they don't have the same taste, but it was a completely Mediterranean house style and everything. And my parents fell in love with it. They bought it, and he was an architect for the mafia. He was one of these guys with the big collars, the sunglasses, right? Just like the movies. So that is there, the Jersey, but they've been now pushed aside, and now it's the Russian mafia.
Oh, okay.
So I always said, look, who do you rather be killed by, the Italian mafia or the Russian mafia? I'd rather be killed by the Italian mafia. At least they're going to take you to a nice...
you might get fed some pasta.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. They're going to take you to the back of a restaurant. They might have some basic manners. I think the Russians are cold-blooded killers, right? But the Italian mafia, the reputation is there because it is real. There were 5 families, and they ruled certain industries with an iron fist, which meant that you have to pay them a cut, or you have to go through them. And then they had, John Gotti. You heard the name John Gotti?
I've heard John Gotti.
I think he ruined it for them because he was the first mafia boss. He was the head of one of the families. He took over one of the families. And he was a Hollywood type of guy. He liked to show up in the papers and all that stuff. And he got them undue attention. The mafia was always underground, right? But they were or under the radar. He got them a whole bunch of attention, and then the New York NYPD shut them down completely. So they're scattered now, and the real mafia that we have is the Russian mafia. I think you guys might have the Polish mafia or something. Or do you have Russian mafia?
We don't have a mafia in Wycombe.
Oh, okay.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, the effect of it is not there. There's no effect. Like, you don't really feel them unless you're in certain industries. Then maybe but in the past it used to be.
So
Polish builders.
Yeah. So just thinking about your, he said we have Polish builders. So we've got obviously lots of EU migrants and whatnot. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that'll change in the next few years with us leaving, potentially, maybe.
Yeah.
But just thinking about, again, sort of the local community when you mentioned, so what your kind of role is as an imam within sort of the local Muslim community. So how has that changed now because of lockdown, and how has that situation changed? How's the community within the Muslim community actually dealt with that? And how, again, that sort of yearning and desire, we want to go to the masjid, and obviously now it's Ramadan, and, and the nights in Taraweeh and all the rest of it, and all that's taken away. How have you dealt with that? How's, the mosque and the community at large dealt with that?
So we have a really good setup, mashallah. The masjid, if you've heard of Imam Zaid Shakir, he's the founder of the organization. And it was called the Masjid al-Huda, or New Brunswick Islamic Center, and it moved from a small little place to a bigger place, and that's where we are now. We have our own qari. We have a really great qari, and we have 2 hifz teachers. They teach hifz there, and we have a social director, and then I teach the classes. So my job is to educate the community and pass on the deen to their youth and the adults, and to create programs that would, get people interested to study. So that's the NBIC, New Brunswick Islamic Center.
What's the primary demographic of the community?
It's completely mixed. That's one of the unique things about NBIC. You can't say that it's one demographic. It's completely mixed. So you'll have Turks, you have Sudanese, we have Pakistani, of course, is going to be the majority anywhere in America, unless it's a completely separate community like Albanian community or Egyptian community or Algerian community. But Pakistani will be the default 60% bare minimum. And then everything else is the 40% is where you get your diversity. So it's a very diverse community. It's and then I teach the classes, and then on the side I run the Safina Society organization, which is something separate, but it's headquartered in the masjid. So any activities we do locally, we do it in the masjid. The masjid benefits, so there's mutual benefit, so that there's no butting of heads between the masjid and the organization. So that's what we do. Now, it's so important to meet personally and physically to get together. And that's the biggest thing that's been taken away from people. Obviously, we all know that's been taken away, but from the aspect of deen as well, suhbah is so important, right? Most people get their fix of deen by suhbah, by physically going to people and talking to them and just interacting. So we've had to replace that suhbah. That has been our goal. And the way we've replaced it is through softwares like Zoom and YouTube, and having daily. So the first day that it happened, that the lockdown occurred, was a Thursday. It was really no big deal. So we canceled my classes, canceled the Hifz classes. Friday was the next day, and that was a big problem because nobody had ever thought Jummah would not occur. Right? It was like unprecedented for us, for everyone. So we had a meeting and we looked at it, and someone brought up the question. It's not the question of whether or not it's permissible to suspend Jummah. The real question is, would it be sinful to host Jummah? Right? In the sense that, from the aspect of, what if you're actually causing other people to die? In the sense that if you're pushing on this sickness, right, and someone loses a father, as Jummah is like 500 people in the masjid, right? I don't know how big your Jummahs are, but we have 500 people in the masjid. How are you going to take accountability of? How are you going to make sure no one sneezes? If one person sneezes, the whole place is scared now, right? So we thought that the best thing is to look at the precedent of fiqh. And we didn't have really, it was so quick, we had to make the decision within like an hour, 2 hours, because you have to tell people well in advance. And so we looked at, subhanAllah, the threshold for an individual not going to Jummah is very low. Okay. Sickness, right? You're sick. Or that it's rain so bad that you'd have to cover your head, right? I mean, subhanAllah, in England would never have Jummah. Right? Right? So we shifted now from that question to the question of, but the masjid is a different ruling than the individual. We got to know that, right? The masjid policies are different in fiqh than individuals. So, but we did consult with different mashayikh. So we didn't do this on our own. This is one thing that we said, that like, this is not a decision you can make on your own. We consulted with many different mashayikh, and ultimately we came to the conclusion that this is something that we should do. And it was very weird not having Jummah on that first day. And then I woke up that morning and I said to myself, this is so weird. We got to do something. And so I got onto the computer and I got on YouTube. That's something I know how to do. And then I told the team, we're going to do a little YouTube announcement, and we'll have the masjid, different people from the masjid leadership call in. And so that's what we did. And I think it sort of calmed some nerves down, but it also gave the feeling to the community that the masjid's acting. They beat us to it. Like, before we could email and send questions and go crazy. And you know how communities go, right? They go through WhatsApp. It's like, you got to be way more active than them, right? So I said, let me just do this. So we did it. And somehow I didn't even expect it. It was like a big hit. It was nothing but a community announcement. Literally, that's all it was. Community update. And it was just meant to be one little announcement and an explanation of what's going on. And then have the the leader of the community call in and literally talk on the phone through the microphone. But it was such a big hit. And then Saturday came, we didn't do anything. But people on Saturday were like, you got to do this again. It made us feel so good. And I said, subhanAllah, I would have never guessed that it would have that much of an impact. It turns out we ended up doing it every day. And then it became like a bigger dose, like a 1 hour thing every single night of the initial part of the lockdown. Every night we would get on, and then it sort of did rally people. I would have to say that it wasn't just superficial, and it did actually rally people. People would be texting each other, texting link. And then I figured, get people involved. And then people would have in the live chat get involved. And people did feel that, there was some connection, even though, it's not, it's virtual, but it did have that effect. And I think that was a decent replacement, for the sohbah that we missed physically.
And it just happened, and that's the kind of thing that happened quite organically, right? So we've had something very similar actually with our, during Ramadan.
Yeah.
We have like a community radio station that just it's every Ramadan,
yeah.
But they weren't able to get the licenses this year because of, whatever. And we were like, actually, we already, the Karima Foundation already does lots of stuff online. We have regular YouTube stuff. So we just decided, let's start off, see what happens with this. So we decided to do an iftar hour.
Yeah.
And run up to iftar, like an hour before, a couple of different people on, some qasai, the few reminders. We've got we had a poetry competition for children as well. Again, just a competition, get them involved, get them interested, get them excited. And again, it has grown quite a bit, and it's grown. And again, it's quite interesting how, again, in that time of trial, tribulation, difficulty, challenge, whatever you might want to call it, the community does tend to come together, and people do want to come together. And also people, they need that sort of comfort, and they find that comfort from each other, whether it's virtually. And again, it'd be better if it was together, but
now here's a question you have to ask as from a leadership perspective. The initial reactions always tend to be positive, but what happens when something drags on, right?
Yeah.
It's the marathon is where you lose, right? So you have to not lose. You got to figure a way to beat that battle too. And I just drew a graph here. Let me show you this graph that I drew. It's something I believe in so much, that in this day and age, which we call fluid modernity or liquid modernity, where the whole world is just like moving constantly, okay, like a massive amoeba that just keeps moving, and you have to live to it. So if you look at this graph that I just drew here, okay, so this says effectiveness and this says chaos, right? So the more there's conflict or change, okay, this person, if you notice, this is not a line. This is not a straight line. A straight line indicates the same rate of advancement. You can't have a straight line. So you need to have a convex line, a curved line. That means the more things get chaotic, not only do you get more effective, you get better at being effective. You see the difference?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Like if you had a line like this, I'll make a dotted line. You see this dotted line? This dotted line means that you're effective when there's chaos. However, you don't get more effective as time goes on. Whereas this line here, this curved line, okay, this curved line indicates that with time, you get more effective. So you get good at handling chaos, right? So you'll be able to reap more fruits the more chaos there is. So that idea and that graph, to me, when I look at the world today in comparison to what it was in the past, it's just non-stop change. It's how Allah has made it, non-stop change. I was talking the other day with somebody about great American inventors. And we noted that there were 5 massive life-altering inventions in the last century. And it was the Ford, Henry Ford, the Wright brothers with the Henry Ford with the car, the Wright brothers with the plane, Alexander Graham Bell with the phone, Thomas Edison with the light bulb, and then Steve Jobs with the smartphone. Okay. So these are your 5 great inventors. And I said, all right, let's go back to the century before that. This is like a sahur conversation, right? Let's go to the century before that. Century before that was all in England, right? And Birmingham was a place of where all these industrial revolution took place, right? So all that stuff happened. So all the great inventors were in England. And then you go back, it's probably going to be maybe in France, but you can't pinpoint a century where you had, in most centuries, you had one life-altering invention, maybe. And then when you keep going back, you would probably have like 300 years. In 300 years, you'd have one life-altering invention, okay? We just had 5 in 1 century, right? 5 in 1 century. So that means not only is your life different from your parents' life, your upbringing, the way you live every day is different from your parents, way different from your grandparents. But not only that, your own life will change within itself because of different inventions that are taking place, right? Now, we have to understand that this is solely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if he wants to reverse it, he could reverse it. We could go back to 0 real fast, right? So that's the one thing we just have to keep in mind. But this situation is, we have to ask ourselves, who benefits in this type of world, right? The type of person who has to think things over, who is slow, who is conservative, not morally conservative, I'm saying in life. They don't like to change, and they want to be fixed, like the brick wall behind me. They just want to be fixed, right? That type of person, they cannot lead. They're disasters.
So then you have that conversation about, okay, how does one prepare themselves? So, so like you said, so those positive advancements are happening. People are developing, and then they're like, all of a sudden, oh yeah, I get my smartphone, I can change and develop, and all that's kind of good. But actually, what happens now that the internet switches off, for example? What happens if, we're in lockdown and we're having to actually, those kind of restrictions and movements are, those movements are restricted. So now, where does one, how does one manage to get themselves ready for that chaos?
See, there's a personality element to it, but there's also a belief element to it. And people, when chaos happens, they get shaken up because what they trust is no longer there, right? Mm-hmm. And we would constantly say, we are like at war with the idea of trusting in asbab. We don't trust in asbab. We use them. And as soon as they're gone, we discard them. We don't believe in them, right? So we have a musabbib above them all. So Allah Ta'ala is in charge of all these scenarios. So that means my bedrock emotionally is there. I'm going to be fine emotionally no matter what happens, and in fact, Allah Ta'ala presents me with a new situation. That's a benefit for me, right? I'm going to grow from that. If he keeps presenting me with the same situation, there's no growth in that, right? So the first element is the emotional element or belief. And you can't really separate between the two. Okay. There's a point where beliefs and emotions, you can't separate between the two. So you have this firm belief that everything is from Allah. Okay. Maybe there's some big conspiracy. Who the heck knows? Right?
5G.
It doesn't matter. But Allah Ta'ala has allowed it to happen, right? Yeah. Let's say there is let's say there was, this whole thing was developed in a lab in China and the Americans secretly funded it, blah, blah, blah. And then accidentally somehow it got out, or someone was like a disgruntled employee and threw it out there into the world. Okay. So how does it change me? Either way, Allah allowed it to happen, right? So why don't I look at that wisdom instead of pointing the finger at how Allah allowed it to happen? Who cares? Whether it's Fauci, Bill Gates, these names that keep going on, what difference does it make to me, right? Allah allowed it to happen. Now it's affecting our lives, so we have to react to that. So the first thing is that if we have that firm faith that everything is from Allah Ta'ala, then he's just presenting us with a new movie to be part of. That's how I look at it. It's like a new movie. It's a new situation. So that's the first bedrock. And people collapse because they're like, oh my gosh, the world that I trusted, the things that I trusted in are no longer there. So they're having a mental collapse. Mu'min should never have that. Okay. They should never have that. Now, some people are more conservative by their nature, so they're just going to be a little more uncomfortable in the transition. And others will transition real quick. Okay. So it's the function of being able to transition and know that the world will constantly be changing on you, right? It's that function that to me is very important to realize, is that the world will constantly be changing on you, but the source of that world is Allah. So you have nothing to worry about. If the source is Allah, then you have nothing to worry about. And if Allah Ta'ala changed the situation, He's placed within you the ability to adapt. Okay. Just like, did you ask to exist? No, we didn't ask to exist. Existence is an invitation given to us by Allah. If that's the case, then He will likewise give us the muqawwimat, the necessary needs to exist. And that's why He's given food to everybody, sun to everybody, kafir, munafiq, hypocrite, iblis, right? They all have what's needed to exist because we didn't ask to exist. He made us exist. Therefore, He is giving us all what's needed to exist. And we have to believe that He will continue to do so. It's just the mentality that, how am I going to exist now? Right? I need to find a way to exist. And I have to believe that there is a way to exist. Plumbers right now are in bad shape. No one's paying them, right? A lot of people, no one's paying them. You have two avenues. You can sit and pout, right? Or you could figure a way out, right? If you figure a way out, there's only two ways to figure it out, legally and illegally, right? So I've always pictured, in these types of lockdown situations, crime is not going to be done by criminals. Crime will probably be done by good people, right? Who have to feed their families. And they don't have any other skill except to steal, right? So a construction worker who is out of work, guy who does little gig jobs, but he's got a lot of tools, right? He could do some construction on your front door, right? And he could rob people, right? They can have burglaries will be up from good people who just don't have any other skills. So so I would say it's that mental element, but it's also this, in this world, if you live in this day and age, you have to be a constant learner. You got to be a student nonstop. You have to view yourself as a student nonstop. In any fields, you have to be nonstop. And if you don't have that mentality that I have to learn a new skill here and there, and if you've hardened and solidified, you're in trouble.
And you've almost got to be ready for that. So, Molani had a question?
No, I just going to say this idea that you're mentioning, this idea of being so prepared in every single moment. So, Ibn Khaldun has the idea of the rise and fall of civilizations, and that people, as the civilization rises, you become more and more affluent and luxurious, and your pillows become nicer, and your mattress is memory foam or whatever. And then as that happens, I was thinking previous generations, there'd be plagues and pandemics, and you'd lose family, and everybody's always on edge, knowing that you could, any second now, you could receive the news that half of your family's been wiped out, a Mongol horde could just invade and things. And then people would always have that preparation. They would always be faced with impending mortality. And for us, I was thinking even this idea of the lockdown, it's suddenly we can't bear to see people die. But I don't know, I think there's two things. Do you think there's an idea that we've sort of overreacted as a global community to this? Has this, the masajid thing, this was a big thing for me, and I know Dr. Sufyan's here, who's going to probably disagree with me, but our mashayikh, the elders, like Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad, Mufti Taqi Uthmani, the big elders, they were you can't close the masajid. That's unprecedented. In human Islamic history, we've never closed the masajid. That's never been a thing. When إِذَا هَزَمَ الْأَمْرُ فُزِّعَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, the Prophet said that when things will become tough, you rush to the masajid. The plague, that's where everybody congregates in the masajid. But now suddenly you're saying we have to close the masajid.
But you know that they spread the plague when they went to the masajid.
Yeah, I know. But
the salah only stopped when everyone died.
But they had a realization of that, no? That we are, Imam Zahabi and those who mention it, they must have realized that, when they went into Damascus, and actually there's one, Ibn Battuta mentions that when they went into the masajid, the plague, they had less deaths in Damascus than Cairo. In Damascus, they went into the masajid. So he mentions that as well. But they must have had some realization of contagion. They're they didn't know what bacteria were, but they weren't that stupid, right?
Oh, I'm sure they knew.
Yeah. So then, even then, why were they so adamant that the masajid stay open? Or they didn't even have that question come up. Do we close or do we? It was just taken for granted the masjid would stay open. But,
well, we had I think that most of the American community ends up being, at least what I know, we ended up being off the hook shar'an because became illegal anyway,
The
right?
government made a
Because you could
decision.
not have gatherings. The number kept decreasing. So when we were thinking about this, there was no number. Very quickly, the number was like 200. Well, we can't have Jummah we can't gather at all. We could barely have Isha, right? 200, there could be 200 people at the masjid during Isha. If there's basketball practice, we have a gym in the masjid. If there's a school that's using it for basketball practice, if there's Hifz class, if there's Isha, if there's my classes, all at the same time, you could easily have 200 people in the masjid. So everything would have to be canceled from that aspect. So we did have it from that element. We had in the sense of the makhraj of saying that, you know, the township has shut us down, right? So the township shut down the masjid. Yeah.
We had a very interesting phenomenon here. So before the official lockdown from the government, a lot of people were choosing to self-isolate themselves. Organizations were changing how they were working themselves to try and limit the spread. And then that included the masajid. So having to decide and asking some very difficult questions of themselves. There's no sort of government sanctioned curfew here, but actually if we're bringing 1,000 people into the masjid and they're coughing and sneezing, we're potentially going to be putting lives at risk, which you kind of touched on at the beginning. We had an interesting campaign by the sort of the Islamic Medical Association, British Islamic Medical Association, trying to facilitate those conversations between the local medics and the mosque committees and scholars to say, where does this sit? Because in 2 weeks' time, our ITU is going to, intensive care unit is going to be full, particularly of people of our demographic, because we have higher rates of diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. And that was a very interesting dynamic that I don't think we've had to face as a community in the UK before. And we saw the diversity of kind of scholarly opinions come through in terms of who were more ready to close the mosque for the sake of this public benefit. And forgive me, the Islamic terminology is not my forte. Versus those who wanted to keep it open for the sanctity of establishing Jama'ah in the masjid. Until, of course, it became a state-sanctioned thing and there was generally no option to keep them open. And that was a very interesting discussion between how we arrive at, as a community, as leaders, and then as yourselves as scholars, kind of decisions for the sake of the community, taking on board. It may well be medical opinion in this regard. It may well be the opinion of other experts in other fields and other decisions. But that was a very interesting phenomenon, even in our town, and different mosques sort of responded in different ways.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask, sorry, but just,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I add one little thing and then you can respond to both? But this idea that why was the response different in pre-modern times, even with the understanding that they did have, and us? I mean, sometimes I do think, I know this is me being a young, dumb millennial, but it's like, have we just gone a bit soft in that it's like, oh, we need to, you know, like, oh, death, it's so terrifying. And it is for me as well. I'm not saying I'm like some sort of gladiator warrior, but it's like, yeah, like, how do you reconcile that between...
Well, I mean, I look at it and I question the facts. Is there real proof that they had a plague and then everyone went to the masajid? Yeah. Is there any, do we have facts about that? Right? Okay. 1 plague, 2 plagues. What happened exactly? Right? So we don't really know. I don't really know. I can't make a definitive statement. I can't make a definitive statement about their knowledge. And I can't make a definitive statement about the results. They may have went to the masajid and gotten sick. I can't say that. And nobody can say that that didn't happen, right? So based upon that ignorance, I can't really make a qiyas. There's no point for me to try to make a qiyas. All I can do is look at what I have right now.
No, that makes sense.
I mean, if there's any qiyas, it's don't enter and don't exit. The Prophet ﷺ said, right?
Yeah.
And the qiyas would be, he said the city, right? Our qiyas would be the home, right? Or any big building, big area, big space. So if we're going to have a qiyas, that's what the qiyas would be. Not that they all went to the masajid, but rather that the Prophet ﷺ, because that I do know, that we do know, that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not enter and do not exit. That we know for sure.
In the plague of Amwas, there was no closure of the masajid even. Like Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As tells them, go to the outskirts. He moves his army out. But there's no closing the masajid. Like if people wanted to pray, they would still...
Yeah, they still would have been able, but the Prophet did say, he warned of this area, or gave this concept that by closing off that area, it doesn't spread. Right? It doesn't spread. So therefore, if we zoom in further on that qiyas, by closing off yourselves individually, you cut it off the chance of it spreading. Right?
For the record, I am socially distancing, by the way. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we all have no choice, but...
I had a little follow-up there before Asim wants to come in, but it's, one of the things I found scary, like I sporadically make a reappearance on social media, is there was a massive, and I think this has been happening for a while now, and I'd love to get your take on this sort of diminishing religious authority. Like once the scholars said, like the Mufti Taqi says, don't close the masajid, some Tabligis decided to still go and do whatever they were doing. Suddenly now that became a stick to bash religious authority with. Like, oh, this is the ulama, this is who you tell us to follow. Oh, fas'alu ahla dhikri. When it comes to Islam, we're meant to ask them, but they don't listen to the doctors. What are the repercussions of this? What's happened here for the idea of religious authority for Muslims in the West? Because a lot of people really struggled with that, the scholars making that fatwa.
Good question. And I don't think I have an answer to it, because is there really, I don't see that there's really the grounding for it. Would you say the grounding for that fatwa that was given of not closing the masajid is something that is a qat'i? Is there a qat'i? There is a qat'i. We know that there has to be, the adhan has to be called. The salah has to be established, right? So we did that. Alhamdulillah, our imam and our mu'adhin and the few people who work in the masjid, they established every single salah in the masjid. The adhan was established, the salah was called for, but there can be no meeting. Even they go in there and they wear, like, they pray on certain, wax pieces of paper to make sure the germs don't get onto the rug, right? But they're establishing it, even though if no one else is doing it. So I really don't know, to be honest with you. That whole question of people on the internet is a whole nother issue that's sort of disgusting, in my opinion. And so if something bothers me, I don't look at it until I find a solution for it.
So,
yeah.
I guess it just calls, from my perspective, just for there to be bodies of scholarship that are open to listening, and whether that is, in this case, to the medical professionals, and obviously there are some medical professionals who happen to be qualified Islamically as well. But whatever the issue may be, that there are bodies of suitably informed scholars and specialists in whatever it may be, that can form and give a sense of where they're coming from, and that transparency. Obviously, transparency is limited because not everyone can understand the full means and methodology by which bodies of professionals come to decisions. But I think, Ustad Asim, what you were saying, I guess that's often the frustration, is that people don't know and don't have the requisite to know where, say, certain opinions are coming from. And where that's not clearly laid out, that leads to confusion. Whereas I think where, say, for example, we've done it reasonably well with British Islamic Medical Association is trying to bring the relevant parties together and be transparent and say, look, this is what's happening. This is why the case it has to be such. And of course, there will always be differences. Dr. Shadee, what I was going to ask was, as you guys are potentially looking to sort of end lockdown that state sanctioned, has there been any discussion as to how you may be reopening the masajid in any stepwise fashion, or how are you guys having those discussions and making those decisions?
We haven't really got into that yet. And the general lockdown, is still going until May 15th. Then they're going to reopen that discussion, and they're going to try to phase things out of the lockdown. So certain things are going to be allowed to open that don't have like 100 people in it, right? Like a donut shop, for example. You only have like 15, 20 people at any given moment. So they're going to allow those things to open up. No comment. I don't think that they commented on the masajid yet, or the houses of worship, because houses of worship tend to have hundreds of people at one time. And the first outbreak was in the Jewish community. Okay, it was in the Jewish community. So there's no discussion on that. I think that in the past, that people did feel that their connection to Allah was the greatest of all forces. That's why it was not fathomable to break that connection in terms of the masjid and the jama'ah. So that's probably went into the mentality of saying, well, masjid's got to be an exception. And I think today that reliance upon Allah Ta'ala is less and the reliance upon asbab is more. Okay. Now, that would color people's view of fiqh too. They would see one piece of evidence as greater, right? I don't think necessarily it's going to invalidate either side, but that's probably why there was a difference of opinion in the past, where it's just not fathomable. So what does it mean? How to close the masajid? But today, people, it probably, we go with the flow and we don't author the flow. Muslims are not the authors of the flow anymore. The flow is being authored by a different group of people. Right?
It's strange because we're like a minority, and like who would have thought that Ulul Amr would be Boris Johnson, or you know what I mean, like because that's like when the khutbah. I remember when our local imam, he gave the khutbah and he's like, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul wa ulil amri minkum, and I was like, oh my, that verse now applies to the Tory government.
That's true. That's totally true. And I mean the thing is that in a matter of chaos, what other choice do you have? You got no other choice. And it's I always like to say this, it doesn't sound good, but our forefathers, they lost all those wars. Now we're suffering, right? If you had won those wars, if you had done your reconnaissance missions, if you had known that Europe was advancing, right? You could have united, staved off all this colonization, which led to mental colonization.
Well, so like Malik bin Nabi has the idea of qabiliya lil isti'mar.
Yeah.
He says it's not about being colonized, it's about the fact that you were able to be colonized.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And not only that, like you had no response except to imitate your colonizers and to love them, their culture. Right. So, and that's where we mentally, as an ummah went to that imitation, and the Prophet ﷺ said, you will imitate these people.
So one of the things I was going to ask was, and that's bringing on to another really interesting point, is actually what is our role now in terms of that? Like what, when you say, we don't want our future generations to say, do you know what, our forefathers, meaning us, they didn't stand up for this, or they didn't stand up for that. And so what are some of the battles that we really need to be focusing in on to make sure that we're not placed in that similar sort of situation? And just one of the things I remember a quote, one of my favorite quotes actually, this is from a sort of random permaculture video actually, but the guy sort of says, you have to create an alternative within the system. You can't just continue to be fighting the system. Your life cannot be just fighting the system. What's the alternative? You've got to create an alternative. And so what are we doing within Muslim communities to make that alternative? And you mentioned, mashallah, a masjid with a gym and all of those kind of things. That sounds absolutely wonderful. And that's kind of creating that alternative.
I think that it's all about knowledge. The summary of it, it's about knowledge. Like how is it that Napoleon came in and within 3 days he took over all of Egypt? How does that happen, right? He came on ships and he took over all of that country, and that has the resources of Sudan underneath it, Libya, it has Syria. How did that happen? All happened by ignorance. Happened by ignorance of what's happening in the world. So they weren't even aware of the advancements of Europe. They weren't even aware that they were actually given a warning. 3 days. See, Napoleon, when he came in, it was 1798 or 1789. That incident marked the shock that hit the ummah that there's something called Europe. now, right? They're no longer al-Faranj, the Franks, right? They're now Europa, and now they are playing the game at a different level. You're coming in with slingshots, right? They're coming in with, fireballs. That's the war. You're in the old world. They're well into the new world, right? And so that was a big shock to the Muslims. And that shock happened because there was no R&R research. There was no study. There was no reconnaissance. There was no studying. There was no curiosity, no energy, right? And it was just like living every day and living and living and living and without any thought of what's happening in the world around us. So when that happens, when people fall into those, it's about knowledge. It's about awareness, because once that's the root of everything. Once you become knowledgeable of something or aware of something, you have to act. So what is our knowledge on in dini and worldly? So it's both. It's dini and worldly. Who are the experts that are going to come and help us out in terms of if supply lines and food go down? Right? Has the community woken up and realized we need a community farm? Right? We have to have community cows for milk. Right? We have to have, greens, chickens. And the thing is this, a stupid way is, what, I'm an IT guy. Let me buy 3 chickens in the back. That's stupid. It's not going to work. It's a group. You have to have a gang. A gang has to do this. So we got to have a community piece of land. It's not enough anymore to have a masjid. You need a piece of land, right? In which the small neighborhood community, you can't have a massive community. It's not going to work. Small, couple hundred families, right? Where this will be our support, our safety net. And we all pay, right, to buy or rent that land. And we pay the guy, a couple of guys to farm the land, right? And that's, I believe, to be honest, going forward should be part of every Muslim community. Like we would take, every Muslim community needs to have a youth center, right? That was 10 years ago, right? Right. Of course. So now we have the youth centers. Now I'm telling you, we need survival kits. And that should be, every Muslim community should have a plot of land where the chickens are raised, the eggs are there, right? And then, some storage, store some grain maybe. So we need to have, I personally believe in having that. I believe in being prepared. I believe in these.
It's like, Dr. Shadee promotes gang culture. I heard you say gang about twice though.
Yeah. You're not going to survive in the future if you don't have a gang.
But
just to say,
do you want to go first, mate?
Yeah, I was going to say that actually that isn't, that's certainly something that the Karima Foundation have been thinking of. We do have an allotment. It's not going to feed 200 people, but, I'm there, mashallah, growing the potatoes, growing the sweet corn, we have the greens and those kind of things. There are a number of people within the community I think has woken them up. And yeah, there is an IT guy he literally messaged me today, actually, as it happens. He is an IT guy and he's got 4 chickens he's bought today.
Yeah. Do you guys have a masjid?
No.
As Karima Foundation, no. We do have a center, community center that we use. That's ours, essentially. See,
the thing is that the idea of the group, you're only going to survive with a group when there's chaos. And your core group, the reality is your core group is the Fajr crowd and the Isha crowd. Reason being is that, number one, that actually indicates who lives near you, right? Who's physically near you, right? People who show up for Fajr at your local masjid, that's your neighborhood. And number two, that's a group of people that you every single day are marching in step with, right? You're marching in step with them. And so the idea of getting in order and following an imam is training us every single day that when there's chaos, we have to follow the imam, we have to get in order, and he's going to give the commands. He takes shura, and he gives the final decision, right?
Not to get too fatalistic, but it's like, how likely do you think that is? So there's a book I'm reading about the dangers of technology by this professor. And he's like, all it'll take is one solar flare and all the electricity is going to shut down, the supply chains will close, communication will finish, and then we're going to have to go back to hunter-gatherer societies and et cetera, et cetera. How realistic do you think that is? Like the idea that Yawm al-Qiyamah, Sayyidina Isa is going to use a spear, which means we're going to go back to, pre-modern warfare. But how realistic do you think that is? And how I mean, I really wanted this to be elaborated on because moods, you touched on this too. How do you prepare for that? Like, I mean, chickens and potatoes, but beyond that?
It's not going to be something that I don't, when I look at major events don't always happen because of a major event. Major events happen because of many little inconvenient minor events that came together. So let's say you have this lockdown. This lockdown's pretty big. But it's not like a nuclear war or anything, right? It's not like a solar flare knocking out the grid. But what happens if you had a lockdown that had happened maybe earlier in the year and in hurricane season? So you're going to have a lockdown, and a hurricane happens all the time, and it's barely news, right? But what happens when you have a lockdown and a hurricane that puts the power out for a couple days, right? So now you're thrown off kilt by two punches. One by itself is fine. So it's multiple little things that result in something bigger. And it oftentimes could take people into an unknown, right? So I always look at it that it's not necessarily the fact that it's going to be a massive life-altering, that's it, we're never going to have supermarkets again. It's just going to be temporary, right? But it could be caused by the coming together of two separate minor issues, right? And
what do you think about the idea, like, I know people have this thing, they're like, oh, look at the queues in the supermarkets and the fights over toilet roll, and thus human nature has now been exposed. This is what we truly are, toilet roll fighting apes or something. Like, how realistic do you think the idea is of like human society itself collapsing? I know I'm asking the fun questions.
Yeah, that's a fun question. I actually, I mean, I just look at it that I don't like the practice and the thought of being so dependent. And we're so fragile. We just absolutely cannot get an egg without relying on a 30-person chain of transmission from the farm, from the chicken to the millions of people involved in the transport and the selling of that egg, right? To me, that bothers me, right? I need to feel that I got myself covered, right? And so that it's more in control. It's all about control. Why would you take the most important thing in your life, like food, for example, and just you have zero control over it? Like zero? I mean, my grandparents all had chickens on the roofs, right? They didn't have pointy roofs because they didn't have precipitation in Egypt, so they had flat roofs. So every person in the apartment building had a corner where they could grow their chickens, right? And my grandma would go up, okay, or you know, people in that time would go upstairs, slaughter a chicken, okay, get the eggs, and come downstairs. The farms was a local farmer. The local farmers from outside would send their kids in with carts and go around and sell their greens. So it's the idea that there is some degree of control over the most basic needs, which is food. Well, security is probably more basic, but food is also up there too. So we have zero control, and that bothers me, that we have zero control over this. Yeah.
But we're so far removed from that. And you know, we're so far removed from that. And I think that's I mean, just to touch on the point, one of the things you guys mentioned, someone said earlier, was about being prepared. And I know in the States they have Boy Scouts. In the UK we have Scouts, and what their motto is: be prepared. Scouts are always prepared. And so we have like a Scout group, and it's just, you know, trying to take these children out. You know, we teach them fire lighting skills. How would you know, we've taken them out camping before. You know, I've sort of taken the adult group as well. Milana came last year as well. We went out to Wales. You know, there's and it's just actually just being able to rough it a little bit, and just being ready to actually have to hike and walk without a huge amount of food. Because again, we're just used to, right, I'm going to go on this hike and need this much food and need this much porridge. And again, that comes back to this whole, you know, the concept of Ramadan is just to actually be prepared, be ready, get yourself focused on these kind of things.
Yeah.
On that point, I was maybe being a slightly divergent opinion, or just asking the question, in this modern world with, you know, 6 to 8 billion people, and I 100% agree, and I sing from the same song sheet about being close to our food, knowing what it means to slaughter an animal, where our food comes from, etc. But how realistic is that? I mean, surely this modernization, industrialization has happened for various nefarious reasons and motives, but equally a part of it is just practicality. And not everyone will be able to have their own chickens or eggs. Yeah,
it's not practical for everyone to do it, but as a community, you got to have someone who's nutty enough to make a farm, right?
Yeah, that is.
And then we all, okay, I'm not going to expend more than 20 minutes on this. I'll give you $200 here, right? But at least someone is fard kifaya, right? I mean, how many people are into janazas? How many people do you know who are into janazas? I know one guy in the community.
What do you mean into janazas?
He's like, he loves the concept of janaza preparedness, all that stuff. And he runs, you die, you go to him, right? He's the guy for you. Okay. He has a company now. He's got a system. He's got supplies. He is the official janaza guy. Okay. Fard kifaya, right? We're not all going to do this, but as a community, we can't think. And for example, youth centers. Does everyone take advantage of the youth center? No, but it's there. You know, it's there. When I need it, it's there, right? So there are some people who are into youth every single day. I'm not. You might not be, right? But they do. So likewise, we need someone who's into farming. So at least that's represented in our community, which is the idea that if I wanted to get involved in that, I could. If I ever needed, to do something like that, the opportunity is there. But we're at the point of zero, completely urban, right? And to slaughter an animal, we have to drive 50 minutes on Eid. And it's chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. People going in with, they don't know how to dress, right? They don't know how to use a knife. They've seen the slaughter. They're like, what is that? That's a goat, son. That's what it looks like when it gets killed, right? I mean, we're too far removed. That's what I'm saying. So I would feel much more comfortable if I knew that we had one of these people who was into that stuff, who a couple miles away, he has a farm, right? And if I need to be involved, I can be involved. But it's like a fard kifaya almost.
And I guess for that to happen, it takes the people who aren't necessarily interested in that, but to still support it financially and as a even with manpower, encouraging our children and our families and whatnot to say, actually, this is a noble cause and this is something that we need to happen. So
you can actually make it a multifaceted operation. You're not going to call it the Doomsday Farm, right? It's going to be you're going to spin it as, hey, this is a great place for your kid to have a job in the summertime. Your kid's on Zoom for the last year, every 7 hours a day, he's taking classes, right? All right, now this summer, go work a couple hours a day at the farm, a couple times a week. You can have a place for field trips for school, right? That they could do field trips, like come and look at how the animals are, blah, blah, blah. You can have it for Eid. You make a killing for Eid. You can do a direct slaughter, and one of our friends did this direct slaughter home delivery. So he had a cow. He slaughtered a cow. He cut it up, or he had someone cut it up, and he rented a refrigerated truck, and he drove it around. And people, for once, bought their meat from a chain of transmission of one person, right? He's the owner of the cow, and he's the delivery of the cow. He's delivering you the meat, right? It was amazing, and the food tasted great. Was it more expensive? Maybe, I don't know, but this, you can spin it in a lot of different ways. And the smart thing is, you got land, find ways to make it happen.
Well, like in New Jersey, where you're from, Doc, is it like how the religiosity of the community, like the way it sounds to you, like Fajr, Isha, 200 people, and this, because I'm thinking, like, if I open a farm or something in our local community, people will be like, no, that's going to be too expensive, we can't be bothered. And like, how do you galvanize? Like right now, everybody's had this big awakening. like everyone's facing mortality, my grandparents, blah, blah. But how do you galvanize the general Muslim public, the guy who prays once a week or whatever?
I'm not going to, I wouldn't galvanize the whole community. I'm going to look for one nut. One person who's crazy enough to accept the idea.
I wonder who that is.
Right? And then I'm going to build on that person. Right? We're going to keep the idea momentum going with themselves, with me and him. Then maybe I'm going to look for a third person. Right? And then keep the momentum going for another few months to make sure they're solid. Right? And then you started going like that, 2, 3, 4 people. Then once it's unstoppable momentum between that small crew, then you could expand it, right? And so that's the way things are done. Now, people, if they do it the opposite way around, and they say, "Hey, everybody, we need to do this," everyone's going to look and say, "Whoever's going to raise their hand is weird." So no one's going to want to be that only guy to raise their hand. So I want to do it the opposite way.
It's a bottom up.
Yeah, from the bottom up. Let's find one person who shares this belief with me. And let's just do it. But once the people see that we're doing it, they'll catch on. Yeah. And then we've had a farm behind the masjid. The landlord came and shut us down. So we moved it across the street to a property that we owned. Then it wasn't really upkept for a while. Nobody really cared. But for a while, it was providing mint for everyone who prays Isha, mint everywhere. Mint is like a weed, right? It grows so much of it. Eggs. I would find, I'd go for Isha, bag of eggs waiting for me, right? So it died out. It was more like a romantic thing. It's nice to have chickens and stuff. But now I think that people's awareness is up. I think we should actually elevate our ability to be efficient and to be in control. That element has gone up in people's mind. So I think it's time now for people to possibly think of having their own little community farms. But you can't market it as a doomsday thing, because those things don't happen often enough. You can market it as multifaceted benefits: better food, right? Good job for youth to go out and work on the farm. Okay. You can say apple picking, right? This is like a fun thing that Americans do, apple picking. You could have to market it in a way that has multifaceted, so you can earn your dollar and make it sustainable.
I would just say that within the Karima Foundation, we've actually been having this discussion for quite a while now. And we do have, mashallah, a couple of nuts. I think that, like you said, we don't have a Fajr and Isha crew, but, we do have our close bubble, close circle of people. And within those people, they will certainly know the people that I'm talking about that are very, very interested in that and are ready to actually do those kind of things. But I think the thing is that and one of the other things you touched upon earlier was about those kind of, combos, like, 1-2 combos, like, okay, you have had a lockdown and now you've had a hurricane. Like in America, you said like hurricane season's quite regular, where you might have had the electricity's been knocked out, or, the grid's gone down. Like we don't, I think in the UK, we're quite sheltered in that sense. Like we haven't had that, it rains all the time, alhamdulillah. But, other than that, we haven't really had, we don't have like a earthquake. We're not on an earthquake, on a fault belt or anything like that, on a fault plate. Yeah. Or a hurricane plate or anything.
The way I look at it is that there's so much ma'asi happening. I look at it from a different perspective. There's so much ma'asi happening, so much disobedience of Allah.
Okay.
We cannot expect, the same rizq to be just coming. Someday that debt is going to come due. And how? Allahu alam. But it's going to come someday that this comfort of life that we have is just not going to happen, right? And it's going to happen someday. And that's how I look at it. And I was talking to my friends about 6-7 months ago. I said, guys, we're not ready, right? And they're like, we're not ready for what? I was like, trust me, something's going to happen, because there's just too much zina. There's too much kufr, right? This is going to invite something. Some discomfort must occur. I guarantee you discomfort has to happen, right? And when this thing happened, I had forgot about the conversation because they didn't really believe me, right? They didn't really believe it. And they said, like, what? I said, could be a natural disaster, could be, I didn't say plague, I didn't think about a plague or a disease. It could be a natural disaster, it could be a race war, it could be something. Something negative will occur because you don't commit this much disobedience to Allah and just go on living normally. We're not ready for that, right?
You know, this idea, I mean, Pakistan, I don't know if we want to go to Pakistan, but I don't know if you know Mullah Tariq Jameel.
Yeah.
So they had a telethon. You guys, I don't know if you know what we're talking about. They had this telethon where, you know, like now, because the governments are having to ask people for charity, which is like a crazy statement. In the UK, they're asking, they've got this old man walking around his garden about 1 million times to fundraise for the NHS because the government doesn't want to pay for it. But in Pakistan, it's sort of understandable, right? So they did a telethon and they got Mullah Tariq Jameel to give like a speech. And in his speech, he quotes the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about when the fitan come and when the ma'asi increase and when the zina becomes rife and when the lying becomes prevalent, then get ready, the punishment's coming. And the backlash he got, I don't know if you've seen this, it's been absolutely massive. Like he came out, he was on news channel, to be honest, and he's like, oh, the media lies all the time, and because of the lying, that Allah will punish. And then, you know, the women, the immodest, and the feminists come out and they say, how dare you blame us? It's not us. It's not our fault. The plague is science or whatever. And then, you know, the news media guys got really offended. They're like, no, why are you blaming us? It's not our fault that we're lying or this and that, you know. And they found it so difficult to fathom the idea that they're getting, that it could be there. I mean, it's part of like our own selfish individualistic culture now, right? It's everybody's fault but mine. God forbid, I'm the reason that the plague comes in, or I'm the reason this comes in. And I was thinking about this thing, one of the scholars, he had this idea, because I think for Muslims, it's hit us hardest, not physically, but spiritually, because we've lost our masajid and the Eid and all these different things we've lost. I remember one of the mashayikh, he mentioned, you know, when the Muslim sins, Allah hits him harder than he hits the non-Muslim, because we're the beloveds of Allah. So when Allah sees us fall short, we're going to get more discipline from Allah Jalla wa Ala. And the idea that He's giving us here so He doesn't give it to us there, right? But I was just thinking, how do you convince, not even how do you convince people, but how do you reconcile that you know, like, oh, it's scientific, or and how that people are struggling so much with the idea that that it could possibly be my fault. But you don't want people to think that Allah is some sort of, you know, evil God that He's just going to punish you willy-nilly. Like, how do you explain that to people, especially to children?
It's very simple. If you have a business, okay, and you're overspending, right, and you're starting to buy yourself yachts and you're buying cars and you're you're on debt now. You're taking credit debt, right? You're buying everything on credit, because the banks know that you make so much money that you'll pay them back. So now you've taken out loans far exceed your income, okay, or loans that barely meet your income, and then one flood happens in your building and you can't do business for 6 months. So anyone who's smart realizes when you're taking that much debt out, right, and you're in that much debt, one little thing, it's just a matter of time before your business collapses, right? So when it does collapse, you don't blame the toilet for destroying your business, right? The toilet was just like the flooded toilet or the flooded whatever basement that's just the first thing that pushed the one domino, right? But you're the one who stacked the dominoes up against yourself by taking so much debt. So we have a Khaliq and we keep going against him and everything. Okay. One little thing is going to come. Why do you think that Allah is going to come and swoop and help us? Because we haven't paid attention to Him, right? We've been disobeying Him. And we have to realize that we created this environment where we're not deserving of rahmah, right? We've closed off that rahmah in a sense. Okay. It's just not that Allah Ta'ala does not want to have rahmah. Allah wills for us rahmah, but He says, فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. I'd love to have rahmah for He loves to have rahmah for His ibad, right? But I will only ordain it when you make yourself ready for it by taqwa. So we're the one who closed the door on that. So we're living this type of free-flowing style, like someone who's free spending, and then wonders, why is it that I go out of business? You went out of business because your free spending is way out of whack. Right? Your finances.
I think practically as well, I'm seeing that for myself. We talk about, say, not respecting elders, not serving elders, not having a sense of community. And when you don't have that, when a calamity comes, you feel it. So I work in a very elderly population of patients. They're isolated, they're on their own. And when there's not a network or a family nearby, and obviously there's probably a multitude of reasons for that, but that's not there. When the pandemic comes, you're going to realize that they're going to be starving, they're going to be going without their food, no one's going to be able to know when they've died. And that's a kind of sort of sick, individualistic society that we're living in, and that's what we're seeing. And obviously spiritually, that's another dimension as well.
It's the same thing. Like, you're a doctor, you can look at someone's record and you're like, man, it's coming, right? Like your sugar is horrible, your diabetes, your cholesterol is through the roof, you don't exercise, you smoke. You look at his file and say, it's coming. It's just a matter of time, right? Financial people, right? If you have any finance guys or number crunching guys, they look at books and they say dark times are coming. They look at the organization's books and like, the income streams are less than the costs. It's just simple math. Every mu'min who has his heart connected to Allah, who knows the way in which Allah works, disobedience invites problems. It's that simple. How? Who knows? But whenever that problem comes, don't blame the problem. You invited it like a magnet, right? If I go having a positive charge, negative charges are going to come towards me, right? So I don't blame the negative charge. It's me who has a huge positive charge that's attracting the magnets, right? So we're attracting. So the idea that we say that we primed ourselves for this situation by constant disobedience.
One of the questions I struggle with, because I had a few kids ask me recently, I was teaching one of the classes, and they go, is Allah angry with us? And I was just thinking, they're like ma'soom children, and like, I can't imagine Allah Jalla wa Ala being angry with them. And I was also thinking, like, our elders who populate the masajid that we ignore, like, we don't, I try to go to the masjid here and there as much as I can, but there's, but you know, like, the elders, they did go to the masjid, and then they lost the masjid because of our sins, which is what it seems to me, right? Like, but I really struggle to explain it to children. Like, the idea that they're like, is Allah angry with me? Is that so? How would you tell a child?
Well, I look at it like this: stuff is going to happen either way. You put yourself in the position to suffer or benefit or be neutral, right? So it's not that and the event is not Allah's anger, indicative of Allah's anger. The event is going to happen either way. So was Allah angry at Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah? He wasn't. So they got a plague, Al-Amwas, in the city of Amwas. But so it's not the event that indicates Allah's anger, right? It's how you respond that indicates you're standing with Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala does not change with people. It's people who move themselves and expose themselves to His mercy at one point. They move in their behavior and they expose themselves to His wrath at some point, right? And so how we react to it indicates our standing with Allah. It's not the event, it's our reaction to the event. So if we react by increasing, improving, right, doing better, that means that Allah sent this to help us, right? Even though it's painful and uncomfortable, but everything good is painful and uncomfortable. School is painful and uncomfortable. Farming is painful and uncomfortable, right? Going to work is painful and uncomfortable. But Allah offered it. That's the avenue of benefit. So I always tell people, look at the reaction. This is what Abdul Qadir al-Jailani said. Someone said, how do I know if something is trial or punishment or benefit? He said, look at your reaction. If you react with khair, then it's good for you. Just because it's uncomfortable does not mean it's bad for you.
The hadith where the Prophet
objectively bad, right? Like plague is objectively bad, right? But it's still, you can benefit from it.
The Prophet said in the hadith that it's a punishment for those that came before you, but he also said وَرَحْمَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ.
Yeah.
That it's a mercy. As long as you're mu'min, and whatever that entails, all the baggage that comes with being a mu'min, then for you will be a mercy. And I think, subhanAllah, no.
That's how we have to look at it. Look at everything negative. You have to look at it as how you react is really more important than the event itself, unless you have a direct hand in the event. right?
See, I don't know how long we got left, but I really wanted to go to your sojourn at SOAS. I saw that as a topic point
Oh,
of
yeah.
discussion, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, so Mood, do you want to introduce that? I don't know, like, how long were you did your PhD? I read your PhD, alhamdulillah.
Oh, you did?
It's on Imam al-Haddad.
Al-Haddad, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, his da'wah, the da'wah of Imam al-Haddad, rahimahullah
Yeah.
ta'ala. But, like, so I don't know, just give us like an outline of how did you end up at SOAS?
So in 2000, I was graduating college. I was my last year of college, 2000, 2001. And then I wanted to go to Mauritania. That was my thing. And my parents were so worried that I'm going to get sick. And on top of that, they're like, how are you going to live? This is not a way to live, right? I said, I'll be a substitute teacher, earn $75 a day. And if I do 100 days, right, then $7,000 or so dollars, let's say they take out some taxes, that'll be enough to last 1 year in Mauritania, right? So at that point, my mom's about to have a heart attack. And they said, you're going to have to live like everyone else and get a proper profession, a proper degree, right? So I said the only way I could do both of these things that I want is through an Islamic studies PhD. So I'm not going to go to medical school. I'm not going to become an accountant. I'm not into that stuff. So I said, okay, so I try to merge the two, right? And my goal was to do the bare minimum in academia because I didn't really like it, but choose a subject that would allow me and give me an excuse to go study with the scholars, right? That was my plan. So I went to the at that time, Sheikh Mohsin and Najjar had moved to America. And he had been someone who had spent some time with the Habib. And in America at the time, there were not many scholars or anyone with any traditional connection at all.
Do you mean like Sufi scholars or just general scholarship?
No, even general scholarship, like connection to the Sanad, a Sanad al-Muttasil. Back in those days, you didn't find a lot of people like that. So my friends were down there. I'd made some friends down there in Virginia. And I said, you know what, let's check out Virginia. So I applied to a bunch of schools there. And then I saw Sayyid Hussein Nasr at GW. Now, Sayyid Hussein Nasr was somebody, I've seen his books. I didn't know anything about him. But I've seen his books, right? And they were pretty good books. So I end up signing up there, and they accept me there. I'm there, I'm accepted. And in the first meeting, I said, I'll do the master's, then I'll do the PhD. And they said, actually, if you do the PhD, you're going to have to go to a different department and start over because we don't have a PhD program. So I'm already accepted in the master's program. Then I discovered they don't really have a PhD program. So all right, let's just, because you don't want to wait another year to apply again. So I was like, let me accept this master's. And so I'll figure another place to go for the PhD afterwards. Now, every American college said to me, you got to do our master's. But the British colleges said, we'll accept the master's from America, right? So that's what got me to go to England. Okay, is when I asked. And I end up applying to a number of schools in England. And I figured, like London is going to be the place that, you're going to meet everyone, you're going to be there. So we go there, never been there before, don't know anything about it. It was a completely new experience. So I remember going with my dad for the first 2 weeks to get settled down. And we end up going to Phocis. I don't know if you guys know about Phocis. There's that house on, what is it called? Mulberry Lane or something?
Mapesbury Road in
Mapesbury Road, 34. I think it's 34 Mapesbury Road. And we're walking there, and I see a brother named Harris, right? His name was Harris. And I was like, this clearly looks like a Pakistani brother with a nice trimmed beard. Looks like he goes to the same circles that I go to, right? And it turns out he did. So I said, hey, is there a place called Phocis? He said, yeah, it's right there. So it turns out he ends up becoming my housemate after that. We're like 10 guys who live in a house. I go to SOAS, and my goal, like I told you, was to give the least possible amount of attention and attendance, legal limit, right? To get that PhD. And Imam al-Haddad roasts these fake scholars and people who don't act upon their knowledge, right? And so his books inculcated with me this hatred of this fake intellectualism related to Islam, right? He said it's about amal, amal, amal. You have to act upon it, right?
He's
Otherwise,
very
it's
Ghazalian
nifaq.
like that, right?
Huh?
He's very Ghazalian like that, right?
Very much. Otherwise, it's much of if it's nifaq, right? So that's inside of me. That's the mentality I'm going in with. Also, you had old school Orientalists, and we know that these people had their own agendas. So I went in there, did the least possible seminars I had to do, showed up the least amount that I had to show up. And I did go to the library every day. I loved going to the library. And I had some friends there, right? I had some good friends there. And I would spend time with my friends. I was studying with Sheikh Sadiq fiqh over the phone. I continued my fiqh studies over the phone. I found a mufti real quick right away, and I started studying hadith with him. I found another, and then I found the gatherings. And England was so amazing that you guys are about 50, 60, 70 years ahead in terms of having arrived there and established certain things, right? So the idea that you can find someone to read the Muwatta with on the spot, that doesn't exist in 99% of the cities in America.
Wow.
But in England, it did. So that's basically what I did. I ended up, there was a guy named Gavin Pitkin who was very helpful. He's a muhasibi. He's a Muslim scholar of al-muhasibi, Scottish. And he focuses on studying the works of al-muhasibi. He was my real teacher, right? I had an advisor, official advisor, but she was more like hands off. You're on your own. Gavin Pitkin really helped me a lot by showing me the method of how to write this thing properly. Professor Muhammad Abd al-Halim helped me a lot too, right? He was there, and his translation had come out at that time, and there was a big party and everything. So that was my time there. That's how I spent it. My memories of London are more with the mashayikh that were in London than the professors of SOAS.
Any names in particular that you
I spent time with I would go privately visit the librarian at the Baker Street Mosque. Was an Egyptian scholar, like under the radar. I would spend time with him. He passed away. Allah yarhamu. Sheikh Babikr, Sheikh Muhammad Ba Shu'aib, and Mufti Barakatullah were the three people that I would visit on the regular, right? These people, I would visit them regularly. And then there were some other people that I became friends with that were like not known scholars, but I benefited a lot from them. And then I would just go in. I would literally go up to my supervisor once a month, give her the update. We'd have this small meeting, and I'd go. I didn't attend the seminars. I remember I think I sat through one seminar of Michel Foucault, and
wow.
I was just like, this is a nut house, right? It's a nut house, right? And he was mentally institutionalized at some point, and he wrote about
drug addict, and he died of like AIDS or something.
I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm like, there's no way I'm sitting through this, right? Right? Not even out of curiosity. Right. So I didn't attend again that nonsense. I attended another seminar on the Quran, right? And it was a treatment of the Quran by Muslims that was just like an academic inquiry, right? No sense of kalamullah, right? What are we going to do? So not interested. I'm just not attending it. Simple as that. I'm not curious. I'm not going to I'm not going to sit through this nonsense that I don't believe in. So I left. I ended up finishing the PhD, come back to America, had to do some corrections, got it. My PhD degree, believe it or not, I only actually got it 2 years ago, in the sense of the actual piece of paper. I was awarded it. I was awarded it in 2007. It apparently, the actual fancy piece of paper was sent to my old home in England. I never updated the registrar with my new American address. And it sat there on the floor, right, of the entryway for so long they threw it in the garbage. That I actually went back, when I went to England, the last time I went to England, I went back and I went to the registrar and I told them I never got it. Can you send me another one, right? And they sent me another one, right? Just like 2 years ago, just for the sake so I could have it. I just felt like I wanted to have it, right? But for about a decade, I didn't have it.
I was gonna say, if any kids are watching, make sure you do attend your lessons and classes.
Yeah. Listen, if they're gonna teach you Foucault, walk right out. I'm telling you.
How long were you? How long were you actually in the UK? How long did it take
I was
you
in
to?
the UK for. I was there for 3.5 years.
Okay.
3.5 great years, and SOAS was a great place in terms of the library, right? I loved the library. I could spend hours in the library, right? I don't spend hours in the library right now. I'm a lot more practical than that, but at that
Were you
time,
married then?
I was married. Yeah,
Oh, you were
I was
married back then as
engaged.
well?
I was engaged for the first period of time. When I went, I was already engaged, and then in the summer, we got married, came back, lived. She also did her MA and PhD there too.
Oh,
We basically ended up having some really great years. I didn't want to come back. I really didn't want to come back. I got attached to the people there, but I didn't want to come back. I liked the life, the way of living. I liked everything about the city, even though the first few months I would say I was like depressed, right, because of the overcast. That really had an impact. The overcast was really bad, but eventually I got used to it, and London was home for like a good 3 years. It was like the place that I wanted to live, but I just I couldn't. I didn't have anything lined up because I was still finishing my PhD. So I came back, and I had made my father-in-law an agreement that I would come back. With the one provision, if I had gotten a full-time job, I would have stayed. But I didn't get a full-time job. I got these little temporary class here, class there. That's not going to pay your bills. But one thing I would say is, if you're going to go into a profession, you have to go into a profession that you really love. I didn't like academia from the get-go. I hated it. I hated everything about it, right? Now, if it was academia in another field, maybe. But in Islam, there are expectations. If you're going to study this deen, there are expectations of amal, right? So maybe if I was in like politics or literature, maybe I would have loved it, right? Because there's a divorce there. But Islam is connected to yourself. So I ended up, when I would go to these interviews and I would go to these conferences, I was literally dragging my feet, right? I was dragging my feet. And I'm sitting there for these interviews and for these conferences and disgusted by every single thing about it. And I thought to myself, anything that I do, I succeed. Alhamdulillah, Allah's given me this knack that if I put my mind to something, I succeed at it. Alhamdulillah. But I realized you only succeed at what you love. And I'm like, how are you going to succeed at something you hate? Right? So I ended up getting some academic jobs, but nothing that would keep me interested in staying. And then I eventually had to find my way out of it. So that's basically my story with academia. And love-hate relationship with SOAS in the sense of the library more so than the professors, because there were some bad professors, right? There were some professors that clearly had agendas. We used to call one of them Ibn Iblis, right? I wonder what happened. He was one of the old school Orientals. He must be dead by now, right? He must be dead. He was so old at the time, but he was old school Orientalist, right? And then there were some of these new guys, Muslim guys, that were, nice guys, but
Ayman
massive.
Shahade.
Huh?
Was he there was Ayman Shahade there when you were there?
I think he was. There was a lot of guys but what I noticed is that a complete massive difference between their knowledge of books and their actual living of the deen. Like, they're not even trying. They're not even trying to hide it. Like, if I'm going to do something bad, right, in our community, I'm going to try to hide it, right? I'm not going to do it in front of everybody, right? They don't even try to hide it, right? So if you're going to be a sheikh in a masjid, at least you got to pretend to be pious, right? They're not even trying to pretend. So that I hated, but I loved the library. I loved the people. I loved taking, the walks. There's so much walking in London I miss that. And I miss the homeless people. I used to like almost friends with the homeless people, right? I used to always give them money, buy them food, and be friends with them because, the Imam al-Haddadi always loved that humility, right? And he said that scholars are arrogant, right? And they have to fight harder than anyone else, okay, against kibr. Now, he doesn't, you won't find this in his books. You'll find this in his diaries that I have, that I acquired, that are private, that he lays into fake scholars. He lays into the arrogant, right? That was my education. Imam al-Haddad, his personal diary, this big, right? And his letters, this big, right? So my personal diary, I should say it's his letters plus his autobiography written by his #1 student. So I was into that. And Good Street Mosque, right? Used to have a pizzeria, halal pizzeria at the bottom. All the food was halal, and then the masjid was at the
Echo
top.
Pizza.
What's it called?
Echo, I think, or Echo. Something.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was so many great memories of being in England, right? But now that I'm in America, like I'm used to this now. This is the life I'm used to.
Do you travel over here much? So you mentioned you came over a couple of years ago.
I came over in like 2015 or 27, something like that, 2015, 2016. I might go back. Thing is, you're creatures of habit, right? So now I'm used to the American life, right? Where it's sunny. I can jog outside in the streets. There's a nice day out. The homes are big, right? I have a lawn. I have a yard. I have a garden, right? We could fly. We got a big country. England, everything was so small and tiny. But it's a creature of habit. If I ever had to move back to England, I'd probably get accustomed to that. So
just getting used to things.
Good memories.
I'm going to start a master's, inshallah, in September. So I hope I have a better LSE.
For what?
Economic history.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah, not Islam.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Alhamdulillah. I think, Jazakallah khair, I think what we'll do is we'll draw it to a close. So we've got a couple of minutes left, but just, Dr. Shadee, do you want to talk about I mean, you're everywhere on Muslim podcasts, to be honest. You've been on quite a number of different ones, and obviously you have your own one as well. So if people wanted to sort of find out more about yourself and the work that you do, they can get in touch, or they can find your Twitter handle is?
I haven't been going on it a lot in Ramadan, right? And, it got to become stupid, to be honest with you. Twitter is something I used to enjoy. Yeah. There was a time, believe it or not, that if you were friends with someone on Twitter, you had a great relationship, right? People were friends. Now people follow each other just to attack each other. It is such an acidic and horrific. Now, I don't back down from anyone, but I don't invite acid either, right? I don't invite headache. There's a big difference between backing down and then like inviting headache or spilling yourself into it. And I have found Twitter to become so sour these days, right? That I'm like, why am I even doing this to myself, right? Why would I do this? Okay. So I haven't really gone on that. These days, it's YouTube mainly. We have streams at MBIC and at Safina Society on the regular. MBIC is like every day in Ramadan and with community updates. And Safina Society, a couple times a week, we're on. Arcview.org is how people take classes with us. So I have personal students, right? And the people that I choose to teach are beginners, right? I love to teach beginners, right? That's the level that I love, that type of Muslim who's coming, who it's like, I don't know much, but I really want to learn. And he's so innocent in his intention, right? That's what I love, because I love to be around them, because I want to remember that in my own time. I remember a time when I was discovering everything from new and didn't know, groups, madhahib, rivalries. I never knew any of that. It was so innocent and pure. And that I want to attract those types of students because I want to draw from that purity that they have. And I never introduce them to drama, right? So when we talk, I never try to make them, okay, now like, look, that Muslim guy, that imam, he's our enemy, right? Or that, unless it's a sect, like far off sects that we have to, then yeah, they're our enemies, right? And ideologically, in beliefs, but like the firaq and stuff. But amongst the Muslims, that type of purity that, I just want to be with the Muslims, I need to improve myself, blah, blah, blah. That's the type of person that we like to attract. And the website is arcview.org. SafinaSociety.org is the main website. And some people have criticized us, why we have two. But ArcView is the product where people sign up and we have a WhatsApp group. We communicate on email, Google Classroom, and we have live stream classes with them. And so that's those are the people that I spend my time online with, mostly the ArcView students.
MashaAllah. I think I know a couple of students in High Wycombe that have signed up as well.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, that's again, it's just, this is the other thing, we can talk about how difficult and challenging the internet is, but also it's brought us great benefit as well. So we take the good as well. So Jazakallah khair. So again, just Karima.org.uk. Lots of information at the moment, especially during Ramadan. Sheikh Suleiman Van El is reciting Quran daily and going through like a juz a day. Riyadh Salihin in the mornings. Alhamdulillah, so there's lots of benefit there, and inshallah, you know, as soon as we're up and running, opportunities again. So again, like and subscribe, share these, share the podcast, and share the links and with anyone that you come across. So Dr. Shadee, if we can ask you to just finish us off with the dua, and I like what you always finish off with on the Safina Society podcast with the Surah Asr as well, inshallah.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. May Allah Ta'ala accept from us. May Allah always keep us on the straight path and guard us from calamities, injuries, diseases, poverty, fights, divorces. May Allah protect our children, protect our communities, and keep us on Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah until the day of our death. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
المدى